The way it works is that we have third-party clients, so we have somebody who has an item or several items or a house contents that they want to dispose of for all sorts of reasons. They come to us and they ask us to advise them on how to dispose of these items. So we would normally go to somebody's house, we would assess the contents or the items, we would give them an idea of value, and then we would discuss with them the options they have in relation to where it would best be sold or how best these items should be sold. So if we agree that Adams are going to act for them as agents, we will arrange to have the items brought from their property into our either store or here into our premises in Stephen's Green, where we will catalogue, photograph and prepare for auction. But obviously before all of that gets done, before the technical end of things get done, we obviously have to agree with the client what we're going to do for them, and we have to agree a fee and all the various costs that are involved. Fundamentally, that's a sort of relatively easy bit. Once we get to the point where the auction is about to happen, we set up the rooms, we advertise, we've produced a full colour catalogue where everything is illustrated and described as best, obviously, we can. Then the auction viewing days happen, and they normally happen about sort of, either 4 or 5 days before the auction, and they run right up to the auction day. And they usually include a weekend so that we draw in as many people as possible. Then the auction day comes, and the people who have viewed the sale or people who have viewed the catalogue online, they then register to participate in the auction. They have signed a form, they provided us with identity, they have shown us proof of their identity and proof of their address, and then they are given a card with a number on it, otherwise known as a paddle. So when the auction happens and we start selling, if people obviously they bid, and the highest bidder on the day for that particular lot will be deemed to be the bidder, or the purchaser, I should say, and they show us their paddle number, and we record their purchase with that particular number. And obviously it's when, at the drop of the hammer, that is when they are deemed to be the purchaser. The role of the auctioneer, apart from endeavouring to get the highest price possible for our vendor, is also to be a little bit of an entertainer. But that is not the primary role. But it is important for us to be aware that we have a group of people in the sale room in front of you. You have all these people who are watching online, and you do have to make the whole experience as interesting, but also as informative as possible. So when I get up on the rostrum and I've got lot number 704 and it's a picture or whatever, I describe briefly what it is, but those that are watching online will have it on their screens, on their laptops or on their phones, what I'm selling, so they've got an image of it and a description. And then people who are in the rooms, they watch the screens that we have running during the auction, and they also have their catalogues, so they know exactly what is being sold. So my job then is to, at the very outset, is having described briefly what I'm about to sell, is to ask for a starting bid. Now, very often I could have a written bid in the book, and one of my colleagues will say, "I'll give you 5,000, sir." And I could have, let's say, an estimate of 10 to 15,000 on this object. So in Adams, the reserve, which is set by the vendor as being the minimum that they will be happy with, that the reserve is never higher than the low estimate. So if I have an estimate of 10 to 15,000, anybody looking at our catalogues can be assured, and we state it in our conditions, they can be assured that the reserve is no higher than the low estimate, which in this particular instance would be 10,000. So it means that as soon as you get to or around 10,000, and as I say, no higher than 10,000, that item will be on the market. On the day, I look for a bid from the room when I come to a particular lot, and perhaps we have a written bid in from an absentee bidder, and we start at 5,000. So I take 5,000 bid from my colleague bidding on behalf of the absentee bidder. And then perhaps I'll have somebody in the room, and very often they could be people that I will know are interested in this particular object, or they could be people that I have no idea who they are at all on a personal basis. I've never seen them before. They could be acting for somebody else, whatever it might be. I could have people on the telephone, and I could have internet bidders. So I normally, if I'm on an object of that sort of value, I would normally go up in €500 increments. So I would go from 5,000 to 5,500, 6,000, 6,500, and then very quickly, hopefully, get to 10,000. So if there's no additional bidders, and if I have a reserve of 10,000, the person who bids 10,000 at the fall of the hammer becomes the purchaser. But in a lot of cases, thankfully, there are other bidders, and the bidding goes on beyond the 10,000, and it falls at 12,500 or 15,000 or 20,000 or whatever it might be. So my job is to make sure that I have exhausted all the various bidders, and I've let everybody know that I'm about to sell. And we don't tend to do that going, gone thing, because that tends to be a property, a land and real estate type auction situation. What we do is we say, fair warning, I'm selling, and bang, it's gone. Now, occasionally you do get people who come in after that event because they're perhaps think that they're being cute and that they're leaving it to the last minute. But very often, if they haven't made any contact with me and any eye contact, before the end of that particular passage, before I put down, I have absolutely no idea that they are going to be perhaps giving me a bid. So it's important when somebody is interested in buying something to actually put in a bid so that I know that they are involved. I know that they are interested. Now, sometimes they mightn't put in a bid, but they will have given me some sort of eye contact so that I know that they are potentially going to give me a bid, and I will look at them. And all the underbidders, just before I put the hammer down, I will just check with them to make sure that they haven't changed their minds. So it does tend to be a little bit, and this is all done in very, very quick time. And because I don't have, I've still got another X number of lots to sell, and I can't be waiting for too long. I mean, very often our auctions, we might sell 100 lots in an hour, which leaves you with very little time, but it means that people are, potential bidders tend to act reasonably quickly, and they connect with you very quickly. So it has to be done, and if somebody decides that they want to be cute or they want to hold off, they very often can lose out on something, because they just haven't operated, they haven't interacted with the auctioneer quickly enough. What's important to do it is that you've got to provide people with a sense of that they are dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing, and provides them with confidence as to what is going on, and that there isn't any sense of that there's any messing going on. We make it as absolutely as transparent as is possible to do at an auction, so that there isn't any sense that there's any funny business, that it's very straightforward, that we've got bids coming from various platforms, and if you want to get involved, you need to put your hand up and you need to do it quickly. So there's a couple of different parts to this. Obviously, a potential purchaser signs up when they arrive into the sale room, or when they go to bid online, they sign an agreement to complete a contract once the hammer has fallen. So they know that by bidding, they have the potential to actually win that particular lot if they are the highest bidder. And if the hammer goes down and acknowledges that they have been successful with that particular purchase. So when I'm on the rostrum and I'm getting to the point where, it would appear that I've got one last bidder and that the competition from other bidders has stopped. So I acknowledge that you are the likely purchaser if nobody else bids at this point. And then I put down the hammer and I acknowledge that you are the final bidder and that you are the purchaser. And by you acknowledging with your paddle, whatever number it is, you acknowledge to me that you accept that you are the purchaser. So at that point, we have a legal contract. You are the successful bidder, but obviously you haven't paid for it and we haven't given you possession because the auction is still ongoing. And the difference between our kind of auctions, a chattel auction or an art auction, and a property auction is that we could have 500 lots or 1,000 lots. So we can't deal with every purchaser there and then. But that part of the deal, that part of the agreement happens perhaps the following day. So what happens is that we've acknowledged that you've become the purchaser. We have taken a record of your paddle number, so we know that you have agreed to buy the thing. So the following day, you come along with your checkbook or your card or your bank draft or your cash, and you ask for your invoice, which is recorded on the basis of the information that we have and the paddle number, so it all links in. So we give you your piece of paper, your invoice, and then you pay us. So at that point, we are further down the road, and then within, depending on what the item is, if it's a small item, we can hand it over to you. If it's a piece of furniture, perhaps you have to get somebody to deliver it. And that's when the entire contract is completed, when you have taken possession of the object. Adams is a generalist sale room, but within that we have a great deal of expertise in specific areas. We're in this business since 1887, and on Stephen's Green, so uninterrupted activity in this particular sector. So really over the years, we were, as I say, we were a generalist firm. So we were an auction house that sold antique furniture, china, silver, glass, paintings. And then in the 1970s, we were the first firm to actually host specialist sales of Irish art. So this was at a time when perhaps the most popular kind of art was the old masters. And then we started, and my predecessors started selling modern Irish art and putting it into specialist sales. So that was the first time that had been done in Ireland. So we've continued, obviously, to do that, and that is one of our mainstays of our business is important Irish art. But we also do specialist sales of memorabilia. We do history auctions. So that would be items of historical interest, whether they're proclamations of the Irish Republic, or whether they're, items to do with people who were involved in the War of Independence or the Civil War, or the 1916 Rising. So all that sort of memorabilia is within the parameters of our history auctions. We also have sales of fine jewellery and watches. We also occasionally have, when we can get a seller, we would have wine auctions. So it tends to be a fairly broad, market that we are involved in. We tend not to be involved in things like coins and stamps and books to some degree, because that's a very, very specialised area that we just, to date, we haven't gotten too firmly involved in. The information in relation to the province is usually conveyed in the catalogue. So in our catalogue description, we will describe what something is. So we will have a lot number for the item, we'll have a photograph, we'll have a description of what it is, and we'll have an estimate. But not everything has a provenance because we don't always know the history of an object. Because in the nature of things, somebody comes into our sale rooms or we go out to somebody's house and they say, well, my father bought it or my grandfather bought this thing. I don't know where it came from. I got it, it was left to me, by this person, and I know nothing about it. So we can't pass on that information because there's no information to be given, apart from saying, the provenance is a private person in County Dublin who got it from another private person. That's a waste of space. It doesn't convey anything other than the fact that it has come through a private source. The only time provenance is of interest is, and I mean, obviously, the more provenance everything has, the better. But it's important if there's an interesting person that owned the object, if it's somebody who was a collector or somebody who was involved with the artist, who was a friend of the artist, very often you'll say in a provenance, purchased or given by the artist to the present owner's grandfather. So you're giving this sort of somewhat, unspecific history, but it does create this line from the creator of the object to the seller. But again, it's not of any great value unless you've got names. But a lot of people are not interested in having their names divulged at an auction. They want to remain private, that information to be left private. But we would normally try and encourage vendors, to be as open as they possibly can about their names, but the vast majority of people prefer the anonymity of auction. Well, caveat emptor, is one of the basic, tenets of auction, of public auction. And because ultimately you go to an auction and you pay your money and you take your chances. But that being said, there are, there are protections for people, generally speaking, at auction. And while, it tends to be more in relation to the condition of something as opposed to the veracity of a description. So we take our role in this whole process very seriously. So when we're describing something, we describe it to the best of our knowledge and our experience as correctly as we know. That being said, it is important for somebody who has a desire to buy something at an auction to satisfy themselves that the item that we're selling or that any auctioneer is selling is what they say it is. Now, obviously, people do rely on the likes of us to know what we're doing. But the issues in relation to condition of something, that is something that is up to them to decide whether or not it's good, bad, or indifferent in terms of the quality or of the condition of it. What we do to try and help potential purchasers is that if they ask us what the condition is like for something, we will say, in our opinion, and we are not professional restorers, that's a completely other area, but we will give our opinion as to the condition of something, and we will identify areas maybe that we are a little bit concerned about, or that there's some conditional problems which they might need to get professional restorer advice. So but we can't help them unless they ask us, because it would be impossible for us when we're handling as many as maybe 15 or 20,000 objects a year to actually describe the condition of each item. So we only do it when we're asked. When I joined Adams nearly 40 years ago, the taste for antique furniture was very, very different. There was a thriving market, even despite all the ups and downs of the 1980s and the 1990s. There was still a fairly consistent demand for good antique furniture, and the kinds of objects that people wanted were very broad, and everything from bookcases through to work tables and writing boxes and all sorts of lovely 18th and 19th century objects. That market has changed dramatically because I suppose the more recent generations of collectors have started looking elsewhere, and younger people are more interested in buying paintings rather than buying silver. I suppose there's all sorts of reasons for that, but the pattern of change is a very sort of gentle up and down curve and graph. It changes every probably 10 years, that when once old master paintings were very popular, then Victorian art became popular, and then they went out of fashion and abstract art became popular, and then traditional art came in. So there's this constant change and flux in the art market. And that does tend to create difficulties for people who are trying to anticipate how things might be, or how the market for something might be in 10 years' time. But within all those changes, there's a constant, and that would tend to be quality. And items which have a great deal of quality and are by really well-regarded, makers, manufacturers, or artists, they tend to be fairly consistent. And the level of price increase for a lot of those blue chip artists in particular tends to be a sort of a gradual increase in value. Well, I suppose the audience has changed again, sort of within the few decades that I've been involved, insofar as the trade, and by that we would mean the antiques trade and the art dealers, used to have a much more significant role, and they certainly made up a greater number of our, audience and the people who bought at auction. And it was probably as many as 75% of our audience and purchasers back in the 1980s were trade, and 25% was private individuals. I would say that nowadays that has completely reversed, and in fact it's probably even gone further. And I would say that there's probably 85% of our audience is private and 15% are trade. And that's just the nature of the way the auction business has gone. We would probably have been described as being almost like wholesalers back in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, and we're now seen as being much closer to retailers. And I suppose it's got to do with the way we present the things that we're selling, and the way our catalogues have become much more informative, where everything is illustrated. So we're producing a very, very different product from what was produced 30 or 40 years ago. And I suppose, private people have become much more comfortable with buying at auction. They enjoy the spectacle, they enjoy the fun of the auction. The younger people, again, are not as afraid. There was a thing back in the 70s and 80s and 90s where people were afraid to come to auctions because they felt that, if I scratch my nose, I'd end up buying something. But actually, they've become much more used to the fact that that just doesn't happen. And really, the only time that you'll end up buying something is that if you make a connection with the auctioneer and you have that eye-to-eye contact with them, even if you're at the back of the room. A good auctioneer will identify somebody who is interested in something because of the way their body language is. We help, younger people. We help educate them in terms of, how they should perform at auction. by having sort of specialist events here for young bidders, young purchasers who are interested in buying things. So we give talks, and we just help people to understand the mechanism, and that there's nothing really to be afraid of. The only thing that you have to be afraid of is your own ability to stop bidding when you feel that you should stop. And I think a lot of people are sort of, find themselves getting involved in a chase. And some people very often sort of turn up the following day and say, gosh, I paid far too much for that, but I had to have it. Which is brilliant from the point of view of the vendor, but it is one of the things that really a potential buyer at an auction, they ought to know what their limits are and stick to it, generally speaking. I suspect that the whole sort of online bidding for things, while it's very, very different to coming to a real auction and actually bidding live, but a lot of young people are used to buying things online. And so auctions is just a sort of online auctions are just an extension of that. And a lot of people have been involved in buying things at a fairly low level on eBay. So they again understand the process. They know that they have to sign up for something, they've got to give their credit card. So they understand that characteristic of online auctions. That being said, bidding at a live auction, which is online, is a different experience to buying at a timed auction online. And eBay and that kind of auction is a timed auction. So you've got days, you've got hours, to bid or to keep bidding. You don't have to do it instantly. You don't have to make that decision instantly. You can do it over time. You can watch how many people are interested in buying the thing that you're interested in buying. So it's a very relaxed, it tends to be a relaxed up until the last minute, when there tends to be a bit of a flurry of activity in timed auctions, when the time limit is coming to an end. So again, a lot of younger people would be familiar with that. The live online auction, and this is something that we provide on a couple of platforms. So even when I'm up on the auction rostrum and I'm selling something live, I have two auction platforms that are providing me with potentially with online bidders. So I could have a bidder in Kuala Lumpur, I could have a bidder in in Delgany, or anywhere else in between, and they can be competing with people in the room, with people on the telephones, and people who have left written bids with us. So I've got all this activity going on for individual lots in a way that 25 years ago you just couldn't even have thought that there would be the potential of bidders being out there other than the people that were sitting in front of you in a room. So even some of my older colleagues, when we started doing telephone bids, found it really difficult to deal with people bidding who weren't in the room. Because it just creates a delay in the auctions, but this is the sort of the nature of real auctions that we experience, in this day and age. The market is boundless now at this stage. As I say, we can have bidders coming to us from anywhere in the world. And the only interaction that I have with them is that a flashing light comes up on my laptop screen telling me how much they want to bid. It's quite an exciting development, because not only do you have all the people in front of you and your staff talking to people on the phone, and they could be anywhere in the world, but the internet bidding, you have absolutely no idea until it happens whether somebody is going to bid on something. Now, of course, even though they are bidding from anywhere in the world, they have registered to bid and we have their information. So if somebody is interested in buying something online, they have to go through a process of identifying themselves and providing us with ID and credit cards, details. It's reasonably safe. It does tend to be a little more difficult to identify your buyer because it's not the same as having somebody in front of you. You know, it is the process of the 21st century online bidding scenario. I think that, you know, this sector has been around for several hundred years, and it has done nothing more than just constantly develop and evolve. And even though the market has its ups and downs and its ins and outs and, you know, different ways for people to bid, I do think that people in general like the whole idea of auctions. I think they find it exciting. They like at least some people like the idea of the chase and getting involved in a bit of competition to buy something. I think it helps people to understand that there is a market for the thing that they are interested in because they know that other people want it. And that's very comforting. If you're keen on buying something and you know that other people want it, well, there's a reasonable chance that when you go to sell it, that other people will want it then. It's not altogether, you know, it's not 100% certain, but that is part of the reason why auctions are still so popular. I don't know, and I suppose having been around for a fair bit of time and seeing sort of a lot of changes, I don't know where it's going to go from here. I think the online auction is becoming you know, more popular. I think people are getting more involved in it. What I would like to see is there being more regulation about the people that are getting involved at auction, that, you know, that there will have to be more information being sought and given as to who they are. Because if somebody is in China or in, you know, Kazakhstan or California, it's not so easy to, you know, to interact with them. Despite email and telephones, it's just not as easy as if they are certainly within your space and within your country or within your city. So that whole area does need to develop. The level of you know, potential or the level of failure to complete in online auctions is perhaps a little bit too high for most auctioneers to feel comfortable with. And I think that's the area that is going to have to be addressed internationally and resolved. The opportunities in Ireland are tiny. It's a very niche business. People who are outfits that operate at this sort of level, you could certainly count in one hand in Ireland. The opportunities for young people coming into the business, again, we tend to take on initially interns who have done a degree ideally in art history, so they have an understanding of aesthetics. Generally speaking, the young people that we take on at that stage, they have done their degree in art history, by and large, or have started doing the professional qualifications, which are generally speaking done through English academic institutions, and are on a course or on in a process whereby they are endeavoring to become art market professionals. It's a very niche area, unfortunately, so the opportunities are very few and far between. But generally speaking, we would have, in terms of our gender balance, we would have as many women as men. In terms of the auctioneers at the moment, we've got 2 senior auctioneers, myself included, plus we have 2 more junior auctioneers, one of whom is a young woman. And, you know, a lot of our, as I say, a lot of our professional staff are young women. I suppose it's an area of the business that attracts young people who have an interest in the arts. But it is really important for any of those young people to actually identify particular areas within the business that they're particularly interested in. So if they're interested in silver, they're interested in jewelry, if they're interested in furniture or paintings, it's important to develop that specialism at the same time as developing their broader knowledge of the entire spectrum that we deal with. So the entire area of the antiques and fine art market in general. But an interest in specific areas is important for their own personal development and to hopefully become somebody who has a specialist knowledge and expertise in particular areas for their own personal development and also the development of the business.